Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Put that thing down.
I'm recording you. This is monument. This is a story told.
This is Sunday.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to call you.
No, I'm recording you.
Oh,
I want
name of this story is Bigfoot. It all happened about 20 years ago on a grouse hunting expedition trip into the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. My hunting partner Dick and I had been hunting grouse for the past 3 days and had been quite successful. The birds had been holding good for our 2 German short-haired pointers, and both of our dogs were experienced grouse dogs and were having a ball in those big woods. We never hunted this part of the state before, and we're using National Forest topography maps to locate the likely areas. The National Forest Service has these maps available for anyone for a very modest cost. The maps have a tremendous amount of information on them and are extremely helpful if you are a serious hunter. We had hunted over this particular ridge and valley area of the forest pretty well for the last 3 days, so we decided to go deeper into the forest to a new area that had a much lower elevation on our maps. These maps informed us that this area had no roads in it, but it did have a Wisconsin Electric high-line power service running along the entire side of it. We had my 4-wheel drive Suburban, so we felt we could get into some great hunting areas with no problem. The following morning, we loaded up our gear and dogs and anticipating a great hunt. We found the old gravel county road that headed into the area. After about 20 miles of bumps and potholes, we located the electric highline access. The electric company's right-of-way was about 100 yards wide and ran for 15 to 20 miles as straight as an arrow. We knew we would find some old abandoned logging trails along the right-of-way. This area was full of small lakes, streams, and tamarack swamps. After a few hours of exploring, we both felt we had found the best ground woods in the entire state of Wisconsin. Every logging trail we checked out had a sign of anyone having been there, no sign of anyone having been there recently, if at all. Unfortunately, the weather was not cooperating with us that day. It was very overcast with periods of light rains. The dogs were getting very restless and wanted out of their kennels. I told Dick it was time to pick a very likely logging road and see if we could find some grouse. We picked up a trail, let the dogs out, and loaded up our guns. I did a quick compass check, which started off as eager as the dogs were. The county that we had passed through was full of poplar and birch trees, as well as large Norway and white pines. Some of the old 1870s tree stumps that we found were enormous, fully 5 feet across. We hunted for about 2 hours without seeing a feather. I knew that had to be grouse in here, as the area was full of the type of cover and food that grouse love. We both felt that the weather had a lot to do with our poor luck, as it could not have been due to the luck for the work from our dogs. We worked the woods in a circle and arrived back at our truck for lunch. Over lunch, we studied the maps and decided to move west a couple of miles. The dogs did not give up their freedom in the woods and get back into their kennels so soon, but we put them in. After we packed up, we traveled about 3 miles to the west, following the electric right-of-way, and came to a large old abandoned road that was on our left. It went south into the woods. It appeared to me that this might have been a logging camp road because of its size and the ruts. Once again, we loaded up the guns, checked the compass, and followed the dogs. A half mile later, we came to an open area that housed a dozen or so old log buildings. We both agreed that this must be one of the old logging roads that we read about in our maps. One of the reasons why we went down there was not try to find a Bigfoot or anything. We wanted to go down there hunting.
Of course, yeah.
But you're getting the impression from all this that I told you how remote it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're getting the picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Both of us agreed this must be an old logging camp and read about in our maps. Although the roofs of most of the buildings were gone, it was still very easy to visualize this camp in its prime. There were large piles of rotted logs and even discarded old camp equipment and logging equipment. We estimated that the old logging camp must be about 100 years old. Dick and I were really enjoying our sightseeing, but when I happened to turn around, and there were both of our dogs, rock hard on point. Dick and I moved in on the dogs just as 3 grouse burst into the air. We both fired at the same time and connected on 2 of the birds. We were then treated to a beautifully performed 2-bird, 2-dog retrieve, and spent the next hour or so hunting the large logging camp and collecting 3 more birds. It was getting on past mid-afternoon when the overcast turned into a downpour, so we walked back to the vehicle. After a while, the rain let up, so I asked Dick if we should take a look at some of the lakes and swamp areas that were on the National Forest topography maps we had, as long as we were this far in. Dick was never one to want to leave the woods. I thought he'd agree with me. And that was just, I wanted to look around a little bit and see if there was anything else around.
Yeah.
We hadn't anything in our mind about a Bigfoot or anything. We didn't even think of it.
Yeah.
It was getting on past mid-afternoon when the overcast turned into a downpour, so we walked back to the vehicle. After a while, the rain let up, so I asked Dick if he should like to take a look at some of the lakes and swamps areas that were in the National Forest topography maps. We had, as long as we were in this far, Dick never was one to leave the woods, so as I thought, he agreed with me. We then drove back to the logging camp on the same road we just walked, and continued through the camp and going in a more or less southerly direction. The road led us on for 2 miles past some small lakes, tamarack swamps, and Dick was driving slowly as the weather began to improve to a light drizzle. Just as we came around a sharp turn in the logging road, we both saw him at the same time. He was about 40 yards in front of us on the logging road and looked directly at us. I have never seen anything like it in my life. He appeared to be at least 7 feet tall with a dark brown hairy body. His arms were quite long with large dark hairy hands. He had a face that was covered by hair or a beard, and he had a huge thick chest with long heavy legs. He stared at us for a full 3 to 4 seconds and then moved quickly across the road and down into a tamarack swamp. I remember vividly that he walked like a man, but because of his size, had a rolling gait to him. He moved very fast towards and into the swamp. Dick looked at me with a wide-eyed stare and says, "What or who the hell was that?" That's what he said. I told Dick to move the vehicle up to where we saw him cross the road. We both jumped out of the car, looked to see if we could spot him again in that direction, but he was gone. With both doors of the vehicles open, the dog started whimpering and growling. My first thoughts were, they must smell him. I'm not considered a timid man by any means, and not much frightened me in my lifetime. So when the hair on the back of my neck stood up, I instinctively felt that something or someone was watching me. I reached into the back seat. With one swift motion, I uncased my gun, loaded 2 shells into my side-by-side 12-gauge shotgun, and peered into the swamp. Could not see him, but I could not see him. Vic moved to the back of the vehicle and tried to calm down the dogs. The dogs must have smelled him, and they were going crazy. Then Dick asked over my shoulder, as I did not to take my eyes off the swamp, if he thought if we should go in after him and see what we could find. After a very short conference, we both agreed that was definitely not a good idea.
Yeah.
As we jumped back into the truck, the rain began to pick up. It was definitely getting dark. We decided to drive out of this area and back to civilization. As we slowly drove along the logging camp and down the power lines, Dick kept remarking he had never seen anything so big in his whole life. At first I thought it was a bear, he continued, but I changed my mind the second I saw him move. He walked just like a man, the way he swung his arms like somebody in a hurry. I can tell you that we were both shook up. We understood what we had seen. And Dick had spent over 20 years on the woods hunting on and off, and we were convinced. Dick and I had spent over 20 years in the woods hunting on and off, and we were convinced that we had just seen was unique. At the motel, we fed and watered the dogs and put them up for the night in their cozy crates in the back of the wagon. After we cleaned ourselves up, we decided to go out for supper to a nearby restaurant where we knew the owner. We needed to tell someone who we knew that we were not crazy and about what we had seen in the woods today. As we finished our meal, George, the owner, came over and asked us how the hut was. The restaurant was nearly empty, so we asked George to join us. We then told George our strange experience that day. George got a very strange look on his face after hearing our story and said he would like to introduce us to someone. He then asked that we please tell him word for word the same story. The gentleman who George brought back with him was a tall and distinguished looking man of approximately 65 years of age. I could see that he was a full-blooded American Indian. He was to introduce us as William Blackotter. Our host asked us to once again to repeat the complete story we had told him previously, which we did. Blackotter listened very attentively. And at the end nodded his head and was silent for quite a while. He then asked us if we had smelled anything unusual. We said no, but told him about the dogs again. At this point, George explained this man was his uncle, and he had an elder. That he was an elder in the White River Indian Reservation Tribal Council. Blackotter now told us the following story. The White River Indian Reservation is up there to this day. It's up there, and they have a very large Indian reservation up there. And Blackadder told us the following story. I have heard this spirit man thing before, and others of my tribe have seen him. My grandfather told me of this spirit man thing that he had seen as a young man. My father has also seen this dark spirit man. Our tribe has known him for many years. We have found that he is not alone, as there are others of his kind. He is very solitary. He has never caused harm to be done to any of our tribe, but has made it understood to stay away. All in all, our tribe believes that he is a spirit man, and we have always elected to leave him in peace. At that, Blackadder looked directly at Dick and myself, and he said, I would do the same if I were you. At the end of his story and advice, Blackadder simply got up and left us. After Blackadder left, George looked at us and said, you two have just been given some very good advice. The Indians are good and honest people, but they look at things differently than us. George then advised us to leave well enough alone. We both agreed with him. We have never told anyone of the exact location of this area, and quite frankly, no one ever wanted to seem to know. I know the story is hard to believe, but it is the complete and unvarnished truth. I did change the names of the people in this story and the locations in order to comply with their request. Recently, there have been reports of Bigfoot sightings in Canada.